of weeks ago, those of you who were here remember that we did some breathing exercises, some pranayama in the, from the yogic tradition to show how breath can be used and its dynamics. We did balanced breathing. We did turtle breathing, the bellows breathing. The different types of breath to help us understand better and to experience better just the mystery of the breath, which of course is so central to life, but central to our Zen practice. So, and I mentioned that I would explore a little bit this book that was given to me by Mike Mulligan, who was a regular participant here in the Zendo when he lived here in the city, in New York City, whom I saw recently. And he gave me this book called With Each and Every Breath, A Guide to Meditation. And it's by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, whose Western name is Jeffrey de Graaf. And it's the Thai forest tradition. So Theravada, but with a particular slant, which is very much focused on the breath. And I thought that there's so many insights here that, at least for me, brought together a lot of different spiritual strands around the breath, that perhaps it could also be of interest to you. So I thought we'd look at some of what he has to say about the breath in particular. I like this image, though, before we get precisely to that. Towards the beginning, he speaks about this unconditioned dimension of consciousness, that hopefully we access, in our sitting and in our life, with all the noise that's normally what we're aware of, throughout the day. He says, you can think of the unconditioned dimension as like fresh water in salt water. I thought that was clever. In other words, the ordinary mind is like salt water, which makes you sick when you drink it. as I trust you're aware. But if you simply let the salt water sit still, the fresh water won't separate out on its own. You have to make an effort to distill it. So your sitting, your practice is the way to distill the fresh water, get to the fresh water out from the salt water, the brackish water. So the act of distilling doesn't create the fresh water. So you're not creating the fresh water. You're not creating the consciousness. You're just waking up to it. You're liberating it. You're accessing it, this deeper consciousness. It seems it brings, the act of distilling brings out the fresh water that's already there, providing with all the nourishment you need to quench your thirst. So it will quench your existential thirst if you let it. He has some things on training the mind, which we'll come back to. But when he speaks about the breath, he starts, this is already interesting what he says. The word breath covers a wide range of energies in the body. All right. So this is a reminder that in the yoga tradition, for example, you speak about the inner breath. And I like to speak about, their inner correspondence, like the inner circulation of energy, like the energy, like the blood flow, or the energy, of the breath, of course. Then also of the, alimentary system. All the different systems of the body have, like, an inner spiritual correspondence. But certainly the inner breath. Most probably, there's the energy of the in and out breath. So we tend to think of the breath as the air coming in and out, but there's an energy involved, of course, in the lungs and the muscles, etc. But if you pay attention to the movement of the air, as your sensitivity develops, you become more focused on the energy. Now that's true. You focus on your breath, but as the breath deepens and matures and becomes more itself, you become energized. You become aware of the energy that the breath brings you. Now this is very much prana, what they mean by prana, pranic healing, etc., which I studied with my own yoga teacher. Energy and breath, even spiritual energy and breath, are very, very connected. So breath brings spiritual energy as well as physical energy. If it energizes you on many levels, and that's the point he's trying to make. In addition to the energy of the in and out breath, there are subtler flows of energy that spread through all parts of the body that can be experienced as the mind grows more still. So as the mind quiets down and as the breath becomes more itself, you become more aware of the energies in the body and their particular flow. That was especially brought home to me. I've done some serious breath work once just a few months ago out in the Southwest, and I was just amazed once again when you really do this full breathing, intense breathing, much like the exercises we did recently, for an extended period, like 20 minutes, non-stop. You're not only, energized, fully filled with air, but you're enormously energized. So this traditional connection between breath and spirit, which are the same word in Greek, pneuma. The spirit blows where it wills, the wind blows where it wills. Breath, spiritus in Latin is respiration, inspiration, exhale, expiration for that matter. These are all connected words, the breath and spirit. So the ancients had a very strong awareness of the fact that physical breath and spiritual reality are very, very closely connected, and that's one of the reasons we focus on the breath in Zen, because it anchors you in the present, of course, something that's very organic and immediate, to live here and now, very Zen, but it's connecting. It opens up vast, gateways of energy that you can make into experience, and hopefully you do experience, and that's what he outlines more and more of. So, for example, he says there are two types of energy. And this is very true. You'll probably begin to experience it on your own with time. There are moving energies and still steady energies. So you can maybe begin to feel, just like with the breath in and out, a movement of energy, in you, like the inner breath. But there's also, and evolving often out of that, and a source of that, deep, still, powerful energies, which are much quieter. And so he mentions that. He says for the flow, you can feel that in different parts of the body. As for the still, steady energies, these can be centered in different spots in the body. And here's he gets into the Vipassana Theravada tradition, where you can be like, he says, at the tip of the breastbone, middle of the brain, the palms of the hands, or the soles of the feet. And of course, what does that remind you of? Well, the chakras, the different energy centers and different energy points. And in Vipassana meditation, you actually meditate, on particular points, precisely to feel the energy and to wake up to the energy that's there. Even statues of Jesus and Mary with, the energy coming out of the heart or out of the palms of the hands, or the mark of the nails as part of it. That's very much the same idea, same thing, same reality being spoken of. So these energies can be spread from there to fill the whole body. So they can branch out from any one point in your awareness, and it's all connected after all. All interconnected, so you can actually begin to feel it spreading and branching out to different parts, all parts of the body. Fill the whole body, he says, with a sense of stillness and fullness, as he says, which can feel solid and secure. Now you're scratching your heads and saying, I don't know about all this. Well, he says, to some people, these energies in the different parts of the body might seem mysterious or even imaginary, but if it seems foreign to you, the energies themselves are not. They form the way you directly experience the body from within. Think about that. He says, if they weren't already there, you wouldn't even have any sense of where your body is. It's because you sense there's an energy, an aliveness is called. An aliveness you can be aware of. Start with that, if that's more helpful to understand and experience this. And he points out, this is not like observing from the outside. You're experiencing this from the inside. You're not trying to create a sensation which isn't already there. You're actually aware of this aliveness already there. If it weren't there, you'd be dead. Okay. And they're not just air, he says. This is energy. It's connected to the air, but it's spiritual energy, physical. All these energies are interconnected on different levels, of course, as we've often said. Now he says the breath is also useful, and this is something you can experience in your sitting very easily, for concentration and discernment. So in other words, for mindfulness and being aware of the mind and your own inner state. He pointed out that concentration, or he pointed out earlier, and now it develops, that concentration requires alertness. You have to really be present and alert. Breath aids with that, because what's more present than the breath? So you're alert. If you're breathing, you're alert to that. And that teaches you alertness to, not just to your breath, but to being alive, being here. And it goes with you wherever you go. So you can be alert wherever you go. Mindfulness, if you stay close to the breath, the simple sensation of in and out can remind you to come back to it. So it's always reminding you to be mindful of it in your life. So another reason to stick with the breath, which is so primordial. And he has a good phrase, a good word, ardency, to be ardent, to be really alive. And then here's where he comes and speaks about working with the breath in the way we spoke of. And remember, in Zen we don't try to control the breath the way they do in pranayama. Let it work its own magic. Let it work its own genius in you just by being with the breath. But he says you can work with the breath, and then he even says you can play with it. After all, it is dance, it's play. Life can be, energy can be, breathing can be, and that's, of course, those exercises can sometimes be as well. Playing with the breath helps you to stay in the present. And he points out, a number of advantages to all this. You can watch the mind more easily because it's the physical process most responsive to the mind's own workings. So in other words, if you observe your breath and you find that you're short of breath, or a little anxious or quick of breath, there's something going on inside. That's why you try to calm down, and you're aware of the obstacles, to being truly that calm, stayed energy, solid energy, that awareness, that deep awareness that we spoke about in the very beginning, that fresh water, the obstacles to that, where the brine is getting in the way. And the sense of working and being aware of the breath and the well-being it gives you makes you also more sensitive to an awareness of where you may be feeling stress or suffering in your body. By trying to get that level of calm and sense of energy, where is the energy then being blocked or distorted or derailed? It gives you and that's part of the practice too. It makes you more aware of what's in the way. And you should get a sense of pleasure and joy, when it really is working. That's our natural state. We like to remind you. If you're just breathing and being, it's joyful and wonderful. And if it's not joyful and wonderful, then there's something in the way. You get the salt water, you're choking on the salt water. But the natural state is a joyful state. And that's a really important thing. And if it's not, then that allows you to see what's in the way, then where's the stress, where's the obstacle to that. And it puts you in a good mood if it really is. If it really is what he says, if you really are experiencing this as it's meant to be, as basic as it truly is. And then it gives you more strategies for dealing with pain, perhaps, as you become more able to access this through your practice and even beyond, your formal sitting. And then you show that it gives you, as he says, a way to realize you can shape your own experience, by accessing these practices that bring a sense of well-being and are a strategy for dealing with. As you become aware of it, you also know how to deal with it more and more. So those are some interesting reflections he has. Now, as he goes into the meditation posture and all of that stuff, he returns to the breath a little later. So find a comfortable way of breathing. Again, this is kind of play with long breath, short breath. We were doing that in the exercises. In Zen, of course, you're just trying to breathe as naturally as possible. And remember, I hope you've experienced this many times, if it really is natural, it becomes slower and deeper. That's what's natural. So if you're going around like this all day, well, calm down. That's something's in the way there. Keith has been speaking about that already. Stay with the breath, yes. And then he says expand. This is not so much what you should do in Zen, but you can become more aware of it. You can actually begin to feel it without trying to do it. The awareness of the body, of the extent of the expansion of the energy to different parts of the body. Interesting when this is more of the vipassana as he goes into it now, but he says you can start with focusing on a particular place like around the navel, and that's the hara, in Zen. That's what you actually should be feeling at a certain point in your practice. You should naturally feel an energy accumulation and concentration in the hara. That's quite natural and normal. But then he says, using more of the vipassana way, you can feel that refreshment, and then you extend it up through the abdomen, the solar plexus, chakras basically, right? Although he doesn't use the word. Then up through the body, through the base of the throat, into the middle of the head, which is the famous jewel in the lotus, Om Mani Padme Om. The Mani, this jewel in the lotus, is the pineal gland, this concentration of energy, consciousness there, according to the yogic tradition. Then up through, and then he says move down to the back of the neck, the base of your skull. This is actually Kundalini. Really, again, he doesn't use the word, but that's what he's talking about basically. Being aware, connecting all these energy centers up the front and down the back, which is way done. So it's interesting how all that comes together here in his presentation, how it connects to these different traditions, all the way down to the tailbone, he says, then down through your feet, the legs, to the tips of the toes. That's an interesting way of doing it, beyond the Kundalini thing. So it's so he gives a list of these different spots that you can concentrate on, but then it emphasizes the fact that from any or all of these spots, the awareness can spread out to your whole body. Remember, it's all connected. And this is what in Zen also you should be able to be experiencing, even from the hara, where Zen tends to be centered. The energy that can spread out, often tied to the breath, or to the way the breath is modified by the energy itself, and you'll find that on your own, to spread out, maybe even in a Kundalini fashion, throughout your body. So think of the breath energy coursing through the whole body with every in and out breath. And we don't want to think about that in Zen practice. It just should happen after a certain point and at a certain time, for this to go on. So it's a pretty fascinating constellation and confirmation of these different approaches, and you can see how they all connected to the breath somehow, and how they can help instruct our own practice. Now, where that leads even beyond, we'll talk about that next week. Partly through what he presents here too. The masters in this tradition, I should have Googled this, checked this out, but they seem to be called Ajahn, which kind of be like Rinpoche or Roshi, according to different traditions. But that seems to be a consistent title for spiritual masters. So anyone have any questions on what I've been saying, or remarks, or maybe sharing your own?
I have a question.
Yes.
So in centering prayer,
so centering prayer is a whole
other thing.
I know. All right. Thank you sorry to cut you off. Yeah. He does mention using mantras or sacred words to tie with the breath. Often, in yoga they often use soham, I am. So the sense of being, I am, connected with the various breathing in, out. It's very close to the name of God in the Hebrew. It's fascinating how it all comes together. I am in the Hebrew tradition, and we're connected to that divine being. But sorry, what were you going to ask?
So in centering prayer, later on the sacred words, when you're in deep state, the sacred words get lost.
Right.
So when we are in Zen, when we're in the deep state, does the breath also lost?
Does it? What's your experience?
Sometimes, actually, the first piece, I was in very deep state. It's like a very boundlessness. Then I think I could have lost the breath,
Yeah.
but I was still counting even in that state. But I was wondering, do we need to count in the breath if we are in this deep state?
Well, that's he does mention that. I thought he'd actually mention it more, but he does mention it, that the breath can stop. And I think I gave a teisho on that once, that I mentioned that at a certain point, when it's so deep and you're so connected to the energy, the inner energy, the outer breath stops for however long. And if you were in your normal consciousness and you were looking at yourself, you'd say, breathe, breathe! But you don't have to. You're nourished at such a deep level, and you're so calm that you don't need to be breathing the same rhythm as you would in your normal consciousness. So it's quite common and normal to slow down the breath to the extent that you actually stop breathing for a bit. And then the energy is the focus is on the inner energy, the inner breath. Yes?
The breath does get shallow the longer you sit.
I wouldn't call it shallow. It gets more peaceful.
It slows down.
Yes,
the
slows
respiration's
down.
definitely slow down. And if there's not enough oxygen coming in to build up with CO2, then that's going to trigger a breath eventually.
Yeah. But the point is, you're not expending, as he says, you're not expending a lot of energy, so not a lot of CO2 is being produced, so you don't have to exhale or
You're not
inhale.
bringing in a lot of oxygen
Yeah.
after a while, so it does get very slowed down.
But so does the CO2 production.
Yeah.
So your body will naturally do what it needs to do. Don't worry about that. You don't have to stand over and say, okay, you better start breathing. Your body is smarter than you, than our ego consciousness. I mean, so you don't have to worry about it. Yes.
Is there any problem with trying to follow more than one? You mentioned how complementary they are.
Yes.
Trying to follow more than one tradition.
You can. Yeah. I do.
I only asked that because I remember a young Buddhist monk when I was in Thailand telling me that at least in the beginning for them yoga was forbidden.
Yes, and I agree with that. I agree. Especially if you're a young monk, if you're in a tradition and you're really gung-ho into it, you want to concentrate on that. I say that to Christian, I'd say it to a Jew, I'd say it to anybody. Yes, you do want to focus on your primary, especially when you're young, to get a primary rooting in a tradition, and don't fix it, don't join it with anything else. Not for a while, not until your spiritual guide and teacher tells you you can or you should.
But ultimately they're complementary.
Of course. Yes.
I guess the other thing I wanted to say is, I don't know why, but it jarred me tonight when he spoke of, or she, I don't know.
It's he. Yes.
Of the salt water as being bad, because I've always thought of salt water as so teeming with life.
Well, that's not the point. Of course it is. Of course it is. But you're not a fish, though.
No.
You can't drink
Well,
it.
we're related to them, though.
Well, I know, but the point, you see what he's saying.
Yeah.
You can't drink it. It's not, so he's using St. James used the same image for brackish water and fresh water as your speech, You shouldn't be producing brackish water and it's cursing and blessing out of the same mouth. So it's just the way you use the imagery. You can make all sorts of points about salt water, of course. All right, let's do the vows and then we can.